Our final speaker is based in San Francisco, as Justin is. It's Jonathan Epstein, who is a managing partner at Bentall Green Oak. He runs the firm's Core Plus investing initiatives in the U.S. I've asked Jonathan to speak last, not only because he's in San Francisco, where he's a long way away from us, but also because he deals across all strategies, but in the Core Plus space. And what I want Jonathan to do is to help us understand what Core Plus is, this whole question of definitions, which Christina talked about in the investor panel about what's Core Plus. We all have slightly different definitions. I've asked Jonathan to talk about that with us, but also to talk about strategies across sectors. Jonathan, up until the last minute, was expecting to be in Königstein. Marika was kind enough to let us know how we could get here, and Ron benefited from Marika's research into the German regulation. So Marika, Ron and I both thank you for helping us get here. Jonathan, we wish you'd come, but we're delighted to have you here. We hope to have you here next year. And right now, please provide us with an introduction to your Core Plus strategy across multiple sectors. Jonathan Epstein. You're on, Jonathan.
All right, sorry, technically trying to get the unmute. Can you hear me now?
Perfectly.
All right, thank you, Brad. Thanks for the introduction. Just one correction, I'm actually in Los Angeles, but still on the same coast. Yeah, as Brad mentioned, what I want to talk about is three things. Core Plus defined, because I think, as he rightly said in the introduction, there are a lot of different definitions of how people look at this around the world. So I'll talk a little bit about how we think about it, and then also how other groups are looking at it, what we think it is and what we don't think it is as well. And then we'll talk about why Core Plus, why we think it is probably one of the most interesting risk-adjusted returns in the world today, as well as we'll go through quickly some case studies that we have in the back. So we will move, I will control the slides here. Let's see if that works. Okay, so first let's talk about how we define it from a financial perspective, and then we'll talk about assets, asset execution, et cetera, as we go through the presentation. So Core Plus investing at its highest level just encompasses strategies with moderate risk return profiles, and sits between core and value add. So we generally target the return level and the various metrics we have here. So starting with unlevered return, and this is how at BGO we think about all of our risk buckets, starting with the unlevered return. So generally Core Plus, sitting between the two strategies to the left and right, is almost always somewhere in the 7 to, let's call it 9%, 8.5% unlevered range. It uses moderate leverage. So generally around the world, any type of Core Plus manager is typically levered about 50%. There are some closed-end vehicles that do lever up much higher, but that's not what we believe is really the execution risk that investors are looking at. The return is generally split pretty evenly between income and appreciation, whereas core, as most of you know, is generally a true fixed income substitute and is really providing income today, and whereas value add is almost exclusively residual risk, and so therefore your return is coming almost exclusively from the sale of an asset and the appreciation of that asset. The bright line that we look at internally and we think investors should really be focused on is the amount of capital going into a particular asset. So we think of the Core Plus world more coming from the value add space and not coming from the core space. And I'll explain that as we move through the presentation. But generally the bright line is how much capital going in. In a value add setting, we like to say that your capital drives an outcome. So you're almost always putting in at least a minimum of 20% of your purchase price to effectuate an outcome of renovation of a building, changing the building and the tenancy. And then oftentimes you see in the value add world, it is not uncommon to have an average across funds of 40 to 50% of the purchase price going in as new capital to rescript assets. And sometimes you'll see 100% or even higher. In the Core Plus space, we have very modest capital and very little execution risk because we are targeting a lot of assets that have already been owned by value add capital, have put all the money in and stabilized the asset.